A lot of people say that camera gear does not matter, and while I don't think they're wrong, I do disagree. I would argue that camera gear does matter, not in a sense that it's about the specs, whether a camera has 10-bit video or how many megapixels a sensor has, but it comes down to how much enjoyment you get from actually using a camera. Does that camera actually inspire you to pick it up and go take photos? Does it make you actually want to pick it up and take it with you wherever you go, whether you plan on taking photos or not? In a recent video, I was talking about why I love the A7CR and the A7C line of cameras in general so much, and I caught some flack because I mentioned I do not enjoy shooting with the A7IV. Now, I've mentioned this in the past, but there's something about this camera that I just love that makes me want to pick it up and take photos that I don't really find in other Sony cameras. Now, this video is not meant to be a hit piece on Sony cameras because, truthfully, I love their cameras, I love their lenses, otherwise why would I be shooting with them? Plus, they've supported my YouTube channel over the years and my photography career in general. But to me, there is a big difference between both of these cameras. Now, I think it comes down to a lot of the things you would expect. One of the biggest things is the form factor of the A7C compared to the A7, not just the A7IV, but the A7 line of cameras in general. When I pick up this camera, it feels like a tool. There's just something about the A7 line of cameras that it feels soulless in a way. It feels very sterile. It does its job very well. It's very comfortable to hold, but beyond that, it just feels like something I'm meant to work with. This is not something that I would pick up if I'm just going out to take photos for fun. But if this camera is that to you, that's great. One of my favorite things about Sony is that they have a camera pretty much for everyone. I see a lot of people criticize Sony because they make so many cameras that are so similar. Now let's just pretend this is the A7C II and then I have the A7IV here, then they are very similar cameras. But to me, they are completely different. So here we have the Sony A7CR and the A7IV. I have them each outfitted with a 35mm lens. I have the 1.4 G Master on the 4 and I have the 35mm 1.8 on the A7CR. Now the reason I'm using these two lenses as an example is because with these setups for each camera, they both do very, very similar things. They're basically the same with very minor differences. One of the most apparent things right off the bat is the form factor, the difference in size. Now that is one of the reasons why I switched to using the 35 1.8 rather than the 1.4 G Master. The 35 1.8 just is much smaller and much more comfortable to use on the A7C, thus making me actually want to pick it up and take it out and use it. Into contrast, when I pick up the A7IV, it just feels very boring. It's very front heavy, obviously. So for me, as you can tell, form factor is a huge factor. Now the difference in terms of size between the camera bodies isn't really as drastic as you would think, as some people make it out to be, in my opinion. Obviously the grip is a lot deeper on the A7IV, and in terms of size in general, you can tell the only big difference is really the viewfinder being much smaller on the A7CR. And with all of those factors combined, including the lens, the viewfinder, and the overall size, like the grip of the camera, that's one of the reasons I love using the A7C so much more, because in that smaller body, and not only is it easier to carry around, is it more enjoyable to shoot with, I can still accomplish probably 95% of what I could accomplish with the A7IV. Now we're going to talk about two cameras that everyone has been talking about recently, being the Fuji X100V or the Fuji X100VI now, and the Leica Q2 and the Q3. Now you might know where I'm going with this, but I think the A7C line of cameras has a lot in common with those cameras. Now I'm not really going to dive into what makes this camera so similar to those cameras because I feel like it's pretty obvious at this point. But that's where the line is drawn with the A7IV because this is very different from those cameras. Now you may be thinking, obviously the A7IV is a lot different from those cameras. They're completely different. And yes, that is the point I am trying to make. The A7CR has a lot more in common. Well, technically the A7CR and the A7C line of cameras has a lot in common with both. It's kind of a bridge in between those two worlds. I would say probably 9 out of 10 times, if not 10 out of 10, if you're on any kind of commercial photo shoot set, you will probably see the photographer with a camera much more like this, whether it's the A7IV, Nikon Z8, Z9, Canon R5, you're gonna see these kinds of cameras. And if you're seeing anything like a Fuji maybe this, although you could totally use this for that, then it's probably as a secondary camera just to get pickup shots or very stylized images that serve that purpose. So that is why this camera feels like a work camera to me, when this camera could totally serve the same purpose as that camera. But to me, it's much more similar to those other cameras, which is obviously perfectly fine. It's normal. If you have both of these cameras, which, hello, I do too, then that's great. Another camera a lot of people have been talking about recently is the Nikon ZF. And while that's obviously a little bit different from, this camera or the Leica or the Fuji, I think it serves a similar purpose in a way, because you could use it for the same purpose as this camera. But what does that camera and all these other cameras have that this camera and all the cameras like this camera not have? And that's character. I think the reason so many people, including myself obviously, are leaning toward these cameras nowadays is because all cameras are so good at this point. All cameras are capable of doing pretty much anything you want. They all have great autofocus. They all have great image quality, but these cameras are just a lot more fun to use. And I think that's why other camera manufacturers on the market that I did not mention earlier in the video, but it's probably not hard to figure out, are paying so many content creators and influencers to switch over to their camera from another camera, but that is not really translating to the audience because that's not what the audience wants at this point. So I think I've made my point, and before I start repeating myself even more, the last thing I will say is that if Sony had never released the A7C line of cameras, there's a pretty good chance I would probably not be shooting with Sony anymore. I said it, Sony, please don't be mad at me. So let me know in the comments down below what you guys think, whether you agree or disagree with me. I would love to have a healthy discussion in the comments down below. So thanks for watching this video, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please like the video and subscribe to help support me. And I hope I could inspire you guys to get out and take more photos. Go out and shoot. I just got done editing the video, and there's one last thing I want to touch on because I've been getting a lot of questions, people asking me if I'm gonna get the Fuji X100VI. Yes, I would love to, but just try to be smart and reasonable. I already have these two cameras, so I don't really have much of a need because these cameras do everything I want them to. So maybe one day, we'll see, but as of right now, yeah, I'm just gonna stick with these cameras. I could have made a full separate video about this and it would have been easy views, but I don't care that much and I love this camera.